Okay. So what year did you first start here?
1979, the fall of 1979.
And where did you teach before then?
By the way, should we identify me before?
Oh, this is
So we know who this is?
Virginia Chanda.
How are we doing over there?
Doing great.
Okay.
Now, I started in the fall of 1979. I came from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I had been teaching at a community college there called Thornton Community College,
Mm-hmm.
On the far south side, about south suburbs of Chicago. I had come back to Chicago after spending some time in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
My first teaching assignment was out in Pennsylvania when I was still living in the Philadelphia area. I had finished my master's at the University of Pennsylvania,
Okay.
and I was teaching at a small school in Allentown, which is about an hour drive
Mhm.
from where I was living. But decided I wanted to spend a little more time with family. I hadn't been around family in years.
Mhm.
So came back to Chicago. Had the job at Thornton, and after a couple of Chicago winters,
Mm-hmm.
decided it was really time to search for a place to settle.
So how long had you been teaching before?
Before I
Yavapai?
came to Yavapai, I had, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I had about 6 full-time years and
Mhm.
a couple of years of part-time work. I ran a tutoring program for a while
Oh,
at
did
community
you?
college near where I lived in Chicago. Yeah.
Okay. So what brought you here? Out of all the schools
Oh, a combination
everywhere?
of things. I mean, I was definitely looking. I loved the West. I had been out visiting,
Mm-hmm.
and even when I was a kid, I mean, I loved cowboy movies and
Oh,
horses
okay.
and everything. So the West was always kind of a goal.
Uh-huh.
And I was applying to jobs primarily in Sunbelt areas. I had relatives in Florida. I had applied there for a few jobs, and then I was really looking for jobs, particularly in the Southwest, and applied here. The job was originally a Prescott position,
Oh, okay.
which I got a declining letter and saying, "Oh, too bad. That sounded really nice." And a few weeks later, I got a call from then Mary Ann Bambrick, who was dean of this campus, saying that they needed to fill a position at this other campus, and was I interested?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Oh, certainly." So we arranged for me to come out for an interview. My parents were a little bit. They said, "You're going to travel all that way. You're going to pay all that expense
That
to go
is
interview
far."
this little tiny." And I said, "Yep, you bet." So I came out, interviewed, and got the job. That was in, when did I come out? That was early in the summer, I think, because I remember coming back in July to look for housing. And then my official start was like mid-August. And basically, I mean, I remember being handed my textbooks
Really?
like the week before I started teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I very much remember about those first days here is the trip over the mountain. So I get here, they hand me a bunch of textbooks, and first day they load us all up in the station wagon and we drive over to Prescott for a day of meetings. Okay, over the mountain, and I'm looking and the next day they hand me the keys to the station wagon and say,
my, that's a scary drive.
You've got a meeting over there. So into the station wagon I get and drive over the mountain. And I mean, I remember after I was here a couple of years, somebody said to me, "How long did it take you to feel at home, coming from Chicago, Philadelphia?" And I said, "I was at home the minute I got here." I
really?
mean, it was one of those things. I just felt that this was the place. I mean, this was the place I wanted to be. The kind of community I wanted to be, the college. I was really excited about teaching in a place that was just on the verge of growing. I remember telling Mary Ann at one point, I said, it's almost like the college version of the one-room schoolhouse. And we were so small. You knew that if you were able to stay and make your career there, you were going to see tremendous growth and development. When I started, we had 4 full-time faculty members.
Oh my gosh.
We had English, art, Tom Schumacher, business, Phil Tatum, and liberal arts, Deer Bartels. So we had 4 full-time faculty members. All we had were the little buildings at the base of the hill, those little brown modular buildings. The faculty office building was a trailer.
Oh my gosh.
That leaked.
Uh-huh.
I remember coming in, having, like water all over my desk, pushing papers out of the way.
Wow.
But I mean, what an exciting opportunity, and it was such a small, little, cohesive group to just, and for me over the years, I mean, sitting here in this building now, watching the growth that's happened is just, and in fact, I mean, as I told you all before we turned on the equipment, when we dedicated this building a couple of years back, I was booked to do a poetry reading group. And so I thought, well, what am I going to read? I said, well, I'll write something. So I wrote this thing about coming here for the first time.
Okay.
And would
I
like
think
me to
that'd
read
be
it?
good.
I mean, it's
since
a little,
we're trying to get the history.
Okay, because I thought this,
Yavapai
because I really sat down and sort of remembered a particular incident as we were getting here. So I called it Interview Day, which is a little bit of a ripoff of something I remember. There's a nice little dramatization. I think it's what they call it at Cambridge and Oxford. And if we don't know, we'll find out soon. I'm a real Anglophile. When people come in to be interviewed, to be admitted to the different colleges within the university, so they call it Interview Day. So anyway, I call this Interview Day. High desert land rose with the road, a place of tints, not colors. Earth, a range of shaded tans, mesquites hung with dusted green, outcrops of sun-whitened rocks, and little else. Except a row of houses, some cattle calm behind barbed wire, the great plain of the sky, and a mountain which claimed the eye more than all the rest. And then a voice which could not be suppressed, insisting, firm and sure, up here? No, there can't be a college up here. It was my father's voice, perhaps not so much worried as wondering what was this place his daughter sought. For answer, a quick check of map and needed directions. Take 89A as you head out of town, his daughter repeated, and then we travel Black Hills Drive. From there it's just a mile more. And with the confidence that brought, I'm sure this is the place, she said, but took an anxious glance before she saw nestled, almost hidden on the left, a reassuring cluster, small brown buildings where they belonged to be. 4 of them only, it was true, and a trailer, by the way. But it was enough to say, I knew there'd be a college here. That arrival was no journey's end, but a commencement in more ways than one, just as all that's newly done. And what is left to tell that wary voice that years ago doubted if the place was right? The daughter today knows what she'd say. Just look at it now, Dad. Just look at it now.
I like that.
Thank you. So that's kind of how, and he really did say that.
Really? Did he come with you?
Yeah,
Oh,
He
okay.
came out because I was like a nervous wreck, So he flew out with me. We were only here like the weekend. I mean, I remember we drove up to Flags and stayed over and came down here for the interview, but I remember him as we're driving up Black Hills Drive. I mean, and there was nothing. There really were cows, And he goes, you can't have the right direction. and I really did. I peered around and finally barely, because the buildings blended with the landscape so much. And I looked in and said, oh, there's some buildings up there. I think we're in the right spot. So that was my first time driving up here.
So what about the student body? How small is that?
Well, I'll tell you, and for you as a student, I am not just making nice. I really think over the years, probably aside from the fact that I love the area, the other thing that really kept me here were the students we had here. For a college instructor, this student population is really amazing. First of all, from the very beginning, I had people in class from the ages roughly of, say, 16, people who were like juniors and seniors in high school, all the way up to, and I'll never forget, and I'll mention her name, Alma Hunter, who was in her 70s.
Oh my gosh.
And taking classes for credit.
Wow.
And back in those days, we actually had a separate a retirement college, a separate bank of classes.
Mm-hmm.
They would often be double numbered. So for example, creative writing, which I taught for years, would be numbered as the transfer credit creative writing class. But simultaneously with that, people would be taking it as part of the retirement college.
Mm-hmm.
The course would have a different number,
Mm-hmm.
and that number was non-transferable.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, one of the first things you talk about really remembering, as I talk to you, things come back to me.
Mm-hmm.
That first semester, I walk into this night class, I believe it was creative writing, mostly made up of retirement age
Mm-hmm.
people who were taking it for interest.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't taking it to fulfill a requirement. They weren't taking it because they had to. They weren't taking it because they needed it for their degree. And most of them in the class, as I walked in, I was kind of surprised because most of them were not registered yet.
Oh.
And I was like, well, and they basically looked at me and said, well, we come the first night to see if we like it or not. Talking, no pressure.
I know.
And fortunately they did. But the student population here is so diverse in that, first and foremost in that age range.
Mm-hmm.
But then, a lot follows from that in their goals. You have, transfer credit people. You have people who are looking for a Yavapai college degree. You have people who want to take courses. They don't really want a degree or a program. They just want to transfer some courses. You have people who always had a solid population of people who came to this college to take classes because that's what they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, as things broadened out over the years, and our population grew, and had the privilege of teaching, Native American students, Hispanic students.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I just think when you walk into a classroom that's a transfer credit, say, required composition class,
Mm-hmm.
and you look out at your group, and you have people everywhere from 18 people in their 40s, and probably sometime at least one or two in their 50s and 60s,
Mm-hmm.
in a group together. And you talk about the interaction and the dynamism that you get out of that, because you don't have the same group, from the same sort of outlook,
Mm-hmm.
just reinforcing each other. Suddenly you're getting, I'm thinking you've probably even experienced that as a student when
I
you're
have.
in class. And
Not so much now because the classes that I'm taking are all people don't take them for fun, but in the beginning I did.
But even
Yeah.
the ones that people are taking as required. In fact, I hope that's something the Verde campus and Yavapai College never loses,
Mm-hmm.
that we have this kind of mix of students. Well, you might be in class with your mother, kind of.
My mom was here when I was here for a while.
Yeah, because I had your mom, right?
Yep.
And then I had you.
Yep.
Or I went to one of the student awards nights a couple years ago, and there were one of the students that I had given an award to. She was an adult woman. She was here with her mother and her daughter, and I believe a granddaughter. They were like 4 generations,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm pretty sure at least, I can't remember, either her daughter was also taking classes here, or maybe even her mother had taken.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's, you can, in the 27 years I taught here, you really could be in the situation where you actually taught the parent, and then 10 years down the road,
Mm-hmm.
you taught the son or daughter.
That is really cool.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
So, what about how the dress code? Like, has it changed a lot? Was there a dress code?
Not really. I mean, I really laugh about it because I know when I first came here, and Mary Ann Bamrick hired me. I mean, I wouldn't be here without her. But Mary Ann Bamrick was, here we are out in the desert, right? She always looked like she stepped right out of a fashion magazine.
Really?
Heels and beautiful dresses. And I had already been totally converted to trousers. I had stopped wearing heels like a long time ago. And I thought, well, here I'm in the West. So, I mean, but she was very nice. She never pressured me. She never, I would try to dress what I guess they would call in the business world sort of dressy casual. Like today I'm wearing jeans. I didn't, very rarely would I wear jeans during the day. Sometimes I wear jeans when I taught at night. But I would always wear it like with a jacket, and, and clean, not ripped.
Yeah.
But I usually wore, kind of dressy, trousers with a jacket or something. But I always remember the first year we had a North Central accrediting team coming, and Marion kind of, if you could consider wearing a skirt. So I dug out, I think, a skirt from Banana Republic or something. But no, I never really had a dress code. I mean, other than, to me, a certain level of common sense. I mean, you try to dress so that you at least look neat and presentable. And I think guys can get away with that more. I mean, we had some of our buddies over the years in the science and droopy shorts and T-shirts. But they're working with chemicals and stuff. But I always, I'd come in and I'd have to sit on the floor in the library looking for books. And I just, to me.
And what about the students? Was there a dress code for them?
No, I never knew of any dress code here for the students. I mean, people just wore, absolutely the range that would match, the range of years, the range of cultural background. Everything from people who probably like dressing up a little bit to go to school, and of course all the different fads over the years that you would see.
The 80s.
The one that really came in, the last few years, you saw more and more piercings. Things, that, but and stuff like that. But no, pretty much it was. I never had any sense that people were being, told to wear something or not wear something.
And what about the overall campus environment? So it's always been small and
and that's, I mean, again, over the years, you really see that change from when, beginning 4 little buildings, a trailer, and then eventually, these building projects would start. At first, it was years before we had a snack bar. And there used to be a little coffee maker back at the back of what's now H building. They had a little tiny staff room, just in the corner. And there was usually a coffee machine and a refrigerator back there, and you could leave your lunch. And I think, again, over the years, particularly for students, that where we now have student lounge areas and games areas. But, I mean, for me as a teaching here, one of the harder things, especially in the first 10, 15 years, there was never a place you could really get away and eat your lunch or have a quiet half hour, because you either ate, basically where students were, and of course, as soon as they saw you, can I ask you about that assignment? And so usually, for those first years for teaching here, I ate at my desk, and I carried that over a lot. I mean, even when we had a snack bar, I usually eat at my desk. Because there never was like what a place would have, like a staff room or staff lounge. There were a couple of little areas, but they were always so small. And the one in the H building was kind of a through traffic because it was right by the back door. So, people in and out. What else goes with campus environment? I just.
What about the extracurricular activities? Were there any clubs?
Well, we had clubs. I think for the Verde campus, that was one of the things that you could see a real contrast with Prescott. Is they had a swimming pool and amenities like that, and our campus, so much. I guess it's typically called the commuter campus. We didn't have dorms, so people mostly came for their classes and left. And especially the early years, there wasn't much to keep people here. So over the years, as there have been more sort of student-centered places, and even when they did things like the Ramada that they built, you would see people being around campus more. So I would say one of the directions, which I think is very good, that we've seen at this campus is an environment that encourages students to be on campus more than just for taking their classes. For me, as a student, which I am a student, one of the great things that I really have been using the last, probably when I started about 3-4, I started right after my mom died, was the weight room.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm still signing up every semester, and I go to the weight room twice a week, and I bench press.
I don't even do that. I should probably do that.
So we had the weight room. We had some clubs, and again, I think those have increased over the years. So yeah, I think the whole campus environment has really gotten.
And has the student body changed from when you first started to now?
Well,
younger people.
Again, I think we have a little more diverse population in terms of culture and ethnicity. Although we always had Native American students, I think we have more Hispanic students than we used to. I don't know. It's funny because some classes you'd walk into and you would say, "Oh, that's it. Yeah, we're going to just the younger students." But then you'd walk into the next section of the same class, and everyone's in their 30s and 40s.
Oh, really?
So I really think that it's gotten bigger. But it'd be interesting if someone actually broke it down in terms of age, gender, and things like that. I'm not sure the overall profile has really changed all that much. I don't know, maybe we don't have quite as many of the retirement age people now that there's things like the OLI program, that separate program that OSHA or whatever that is. And now that, when they discontinued the separate course listing for retirement college, I'm thinking maybe I didn't see, like typically in a creative writing class, and I taught the first, say, 10, 12 years here, a third of the class would probably be retirement age people taking it for interest.
Wow.
And over the time, I think I saw that a sort of drop off in the number of those people in otherwise transfer credit classes, which I think is kind of a loss. I mean, I found those students often, most of the time, some of my really hardworking, dedicated students, I mean, they weren't taking it, as I say, for a transfer credit. But
a lot of them find it intimidating, though, because my mom's at NAU right now, and she doesn't have a lot of people her age in her classes, and at first it was intimidating, but now she's fine.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's one of the things I also remember from early on is reassuring, say, women in their 30s and 40s. And people would go, I haven't been in school for 10 years or 15 years. And I'd say, you're not going to be alone. You're going to look around that class and you're going to see, in fact, that you're one of our prime populations. I mean, our average age, again, the first 10, 12 years or so, they always said was, 36 without the retirement college figured in and 46 with it figured in.
Wow.
And one of the prime populations for community college is what is termed the returning adult, the reentry adult woman student, anywhere from, say, 25 to 45. Although, I mean, I think from a teaching standpoint, with some of those folks, I mean, I remember walking into the bathroom down there at the bottom of the hill once and found one of my women students absolutely in tears just from the stress of exams and things, because she hadn't been doing it for 10 years.
Yeah.
And she was sure she was going to fail everything, And so you did a certain amount of advising and trying to assure people that they could do this, it was okay, and feeling the stress was normal, all that, a little bit what you're describing your mom feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were here during the whole AIDS scare thing in the 80s then, huh? When it really became an issue and people knew about it?
Yeah.
Did the college do anything about that for the students, or?
The story that I have is sort of so trivial in the face of such an important issue, but I was teaching in one of the little classrooms down there in the old buildings, and I came in one day and there was this sort of sweet, almost sickly sweet smell in the room. And it was just me. And I have lots of allergies, so, And I didn't want to, encourage the students to smell something that wasn't there, but I was sort of trying to. And eventually, after a couple of days, other people were feeling this too. What's going on in this room? And I started to get like kind of a heartburny kind of stomach thing. So this went on for about a week. And finally I said, well, I gotta look into this. I gotta ask about this. Well, it turned out, what I was told, now I don't know if this is true, what I was told is that they had decided to use some new heavy-duty, cleaner that killed every germ in sight, and that this was because of concern about AIDS. And I'm going, you're telling me, you're sort of decontaminating this classroom with some kind of cleaner that's actually making us sick because you're worried. And well, I said, I'm having a problem with it, and so they stopped using it, and they never, it pretty much died on the vine. But it was almost like this, oh my gosh, we got to. And I'm thinking, that's, first of all, even at that time we didn't know a lot about AIDS, but I mean, I knew you didn't get AIDS from a dirty desktop.
Yeah,
That you're not there licking it, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean that was, but again here this kind of small isolated community. Other than maybe something like that where somebody's suddenly worried that we're not killing enough germs or something, didn't have a lot of impact.
Really?
Yeah, and that's why I think it was really good when the AIDS class was started.
And what year was that started? Do you remember?
I'm trying to remember. The whole liberal studies program started around 1990, and I'm trying to think when they developed that class. Probably. I'm going to guess, you'd have to check, I would say around 95 or something like that.
Because I remember Paul telling us a story about a student that had taken it and then come back to him and had it.
Yeah.
So, but was that in Prescott? Because he lives in Prescott, doesn't he?
Well, it was taught in both places, so it was taught over the system.
Okay.
So it would have, students on both campuses. But I think, something like that was very much not very much in people's awareness maybe here. And so I think classes, it's a wonderful thing a class can do. Classes like the AIDS class raised awareness, made it possible maybe for a student who was either worried that they were HIV positive or something to find out about that and to have some knowledge.
And was that the only thing that was done there or no other?
As far as I know, I don't remember us ever having any real workshops.
Because I've asked my mom about that just because it's interesting that there was just such a scare and nobody knew what was
part of that
causing
is just
it.
so great. It unfolded so gradually. I remember seeing a Time magazine article when they didn't even use the term AIDS yet. I don't think, or they certainly didn't. And it was just, what's this new disease that's hitting first in the gay community? And that was probably, I'm guessing, in the mid-'80s or something, mid to late '80s. And I think that was the thing with the whole AIDS issue, is it just sort of kind of slowly crept in, got more people's awareness and more in the news and things. But yeah, I don't remember, any sort of quote buzz about that around the Verde campus.
I'm not sure what else to. Oh, what about the male to female ratio with when it first started the school, or when you were first
among faculty or students or both?
Both. Yeah.
Well, as I say, I think that certainly women, as community college students, always have tended to outnumber men. And in a lot of the classes that I teach, which over the years I've taught creative writing, Shakespeare, as you know. Various literature classes. In those kinds of courses, I would say very often the men would be maybe a third of the class to two-thirds women. And I think again a lot of that at the community college level is women's coming back after either raising a family or sometimes maybe going through a divorce and looking to get enough education to pursue a career. In terms of staff and faculty, it was sort of really interesting because when I came here, there were three full-time men instructors and me. So that was. But on the other hand, our dean was a woman. I think the title at that time was director of instruction. It was roughly the equivalent of assistant dean. That was a man. Most of the office staff were women. Secretary, bookkeeper, those kind of things. And most of the maintenance staff were men. It's really kind of difficult, yeah.
But you were the only woman.
And actually, when they hired me, there had been four because the guy who I replaced had been a man.
Wow.
So originally they had four men as the full-time instructors. But overall, I think the mix has been, pretty normal or pretty good. We've had women presidents, women deans, men presidents, men deans. So. And I served as division chair here at the Verde campus.
Oh, did you?
When we never had our own division at the Verde campus. And finally a few of us said, we really need one. Because trying to, do everything through getting all the information from Prescott, trying to get over to Prescott for meetings, this was even before we had the television systems. So we finally made a division, but it was the whole faculty. At that time, I'm thinking we were about 12 full-time by that time. So Betty Clausen was the first division chair of this sort of mega division, which included everything. And when she retired, we went back and said, we've got to split this at least into two, which is what they still have, two divisions here. And I was the first division chair for what was Division 1, which included all the liberal arts areas, English, sociology, humanities, math, science, foreign language. Basically, all the transfer academic area was on our side.
Okay.
And I did that for 3 years, and I actually found that a very, very good and interesting experience, really having what was predominantly an administrative position. I think I had, my load was divided between 9 hours devoted to running the division and 6 hours of teaching. So I taught 2 classes and ran the division.
Is that what Brett Markman, is that his job?
Yeah,
now?
except now it has evolved from, it was division chair, and then the time I decided to give it up and go back to teaching, which I had planned in my own mind to do it for about 3 years, which I did, which was right. At that point, they changed the division chair from being a sort of faculty administrative position to a more directly administrative position, and they called it Division Assistant Dean, DADS. That was the DADS. And I think they had 12 hours out of their 15-hour load devoted to that, and they taught one class. And then, a few years down the road, now what they actually have division deans. And I don't think, they can teach a class, but I'm not sure they even have to teach a class. It's now fully a full dean position, and Connie Gilmore is in that position in Division 1, and Brett's in that position in Division 2. So yeah, there have been those kinds of administrative changes. One of the ongoing issues for any school that has multiple sites or campuses, and certainly when we were much smaller here, is how to coordinate and interact between a campus over the mountain and this campus. Mary Ann Bamrick used to have to be in Prescott for meetings at 7 in the morning. She's driving something, and issues of maintaining the same curriculum, but at times needing different ways of doing things. I remember years ago serving on a textbook committee and saying, we need to be able to select our own textbooks over here because we don't have the same student needs that you do in Prescott. And I think for the Prescott campus, sort of accepting that we could all have, the same curriculum, the same goals and objectives, but things might happen a little differently at a different site with different facilities, different resources. I remember very early on somebody down in the office grumbling, and I said, what's the matter? And they said, I talked to this person. They wanted me to connect them with the mail room. If somebody from Prescott had called here, and I told them, this is the mail room. This is the front office, the business office, the mail room, the repro department. This is, it's it. We don't have like 6 separate. Yeah. So that whole understanding that 2 different campuses can be the same college, but they can operate a little differently in terms of given the resources they have and the student body they have and the staff and faculty that they have. So that's always been an ongoing thing. Even today, serving on committees, if you're serving on college committees, I remember serving on an ad hoc committee on the humanities and driving over to Prescott once a week.
Wow.
Around a full teaching schedule here. It was, you could hardly find the free time to do it, much less it takes, it pretty much shoots at least half a day. If you're lucky, it only shoots half a day. Yeah. And that's been alleviated somewhat by the interactive television system. I've attended meetings where I sat here with the television system, and that's really helped a lot. Yeah. A lot of that is like for a class. It really depends a lot on how adept the people are at managing that. If on the other site, everyone comes in and sits with their back to the camera, and you're trying to go, I'm here. Yeah. But if you have a good chair who knows how to.
I think those work for certain classes, but not for my calculus class.
No.
Not for that. So the courses offered must have been limited.
In terms of?
In the beginning.
What we could offer, how many we could offer?
With only 4 faculty.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I guess we would schedule around what we knew were the needs of the campus. Now, so for example, when I first taught here for the first 10, 11 years, and this was one of the harder parts of it, obviously we had to teach a solid composition offering, and I was a full-time English teacher. I definitely always had a strong commitment to the freshman writing program, because this is the entry in for so many of our students. So I would always teach for the first 10, 12 years. I taught 4 sections of comp every semester.
Really?
2 comp 1, 2 comp 2. 2 in the day, 2 at night. I taught 2 night classes every night.
Wow.
Every semester for 10 and a half semesters. I think it was 11 years. And so there were these core required classes that we knew we had to offer. We also knew there were courses that were in demand, like, for example, for creative writing, back when a lot of our retirement college people, I had people take that class. You know, there was advanced creative writing, which was poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, and the group met together, but people within the group signed up for a particular focus.
Oh, okay.
But people would come back and they take introduction to creative writing, then they take poetry, they take fiction. You know, they take 4.
That's cool. Yeah.
And each was a different class in a sense. But so we also the other program that was really always very big was art. I mean, Tom Schumacher art was part of the Verde campus from the get-go. Tom Schumacher, I think, was the first full-time faculty we hired as a ceramics teacher. And there again, a lot of people in those classes would be people taking it for interest. So we had to be sure we met, the core requirement classes. We had to be sure we offered those classes that were just popular in the community. And I suppose the greatest limit at the Verde campus, because of just equipment and facilities, is we probably could never offer as much vocational stuff as maybe would have been wanted. We didn't have it. We did some auto mechanics. I think we used some facilities over at Mingus for a while. But gunsmithing, auto mechanics, we just didn't have the place to offer them. And I don't know, when I taught here, we had classes in the old high school, classes offered in the old high school in Clarkdale, where Heritage Academy was for a while before they moved to their new building. We always had classes, and we still do have classes at Mingus. Because we just didn't have enough space here.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we had our first building project here and moved out of the old high school in Clarkdale, we actually lost classroom space.
Oh, really?
And I don't know how things are now, but I know even when I was division chair just a few years ago, we were always scrambling to have enough rooms. And after you did the schedule, then the poor administrative assistants to the division and the division deans and faculty, and we were scrambling around. Okay, we got 4 classes in 2 rooms, kind of thing. And can we? And I would say, well, this class needs to be here because here's where the maps are, or here's where the computer equipment is. And by the way, that's one more thing we have to talk about is the development of computers.
Okay.
That was a big thing for me, so I have to talk about that. But yeah, and I think from just talking to folks in the last couple of years, or I retired now a year and a half ago. This is the end of my 3rd semester of retirement. That they're still having this scramble for classroom space. So I think that's a limit on what can be offered.
Definitely.
Computers.
So the computers, those nifty things we have in our desks now.
I have a couple of really proud accomplishments here at my career. I mean, the one, pat myself on the back, is to have been named the first Emeritus Faculty from this campus.
What's
Emeritus is a status granted to long-serving faculty who have contributed, who are seen to have contributed a lot beyond just what was required of them.
Oh, okay.
Community service, committee work, curriculum development, all of those things. And when I retired a year ago, June, I was notified in December. I was recommended for it by Paul Ewing and Connie Gilmore that I had been granted emeritus status. So
Oh, okay.
And I'm kind of really particularly tickled because I'm the first one.
Here.
Yeah, here.
Well,
on this campus.
congratulations.
Plenty of colleagues at the Prescott campus. But my other accomplishment that I will always look back on with real joy is the work I did to get our first computer writing classroom.
Oh, really?
3115. That was, on this campus, that was my project.
I don't even know which building that
That's
is.
that's where the science labs used to be.
Oh, okay.
It's that, yeah, because by the time I taught you, we were already up in this nifty this
Yeah,
building.
yeah.
But what had happened to me, I mean, I've been a writing teacher. I identify myself, I've taught a lot of literature, and I've loved teaching the Shakespeare class and going to Cambridge and doing those Shakespeare programs and everything. But the bulk of my career, and I suppose at some point we do have to talk a little bit about the liberal studies program, but
Okay.
we got time for that. For the bulk of my career, I mean, if you totaled up all the classes that I taught, I'm sure the majority of classes have been writing classes, either composition, freshman writing 1 or 2, or creative writing. And I've always been interested in writing myself. I always, write a poem here or there. I've written short stories, a couple novel-length projects that I've done. I'm working on one right now. But I always struggled with my own writing. My handwriting is atrocious. I can't read my own handwriting.
Me either.
And my typing is totally dorky. So I'd write, but once upon a time, I opened the Time magazine, and the man of the year was a trashy personal computer. Remember the old Radio Shack TR? You wouldn't remember.
No.
Way before her time. And I look at this thing, and I'm reading about this. And I remember saying to my mom, I got to get me one of these. My mom looked at me, what? You're crazy. Well, we did a computer workshop here with a bunch of old Radio Shack. They were monitor, keyboard all together, these gray things. And they used these soft, back when, it's the reason floppy disks are called floppy disks. They're not floppy anymore. They were floppy.
Oh, were they?
They were 5 1/4 or
Oh
something.
my gosh.
But it was my first introduction to word processing. And I was like, this is what I have been waiting all my life for my own writing. Move it, delete it, change it, print it. It doesn't matter how bad you type, because you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
And so from the very first time that I did that, I said, this has got to become part of teaching writing. So that's in the mid-'80s. I got this old trashy. And I remember they offered us some kind of deal where we could buy computers through the college, and I got it was an IBM Model 30 or something. And more, I probably couldn't write any other way anymore.
That's fine.
If I had to write, a short story on paper, forget it. So I was always interested in how are we going to bring this technology into the classroom. I created an experimental course for creative writing using computers to enhance our ability to edit. And this was we offered to put this over in the high school in Clarkdale. I worked with our computer guy. We hooked up 2 TV monitors, an Apple with its monitor. So I had this Apple computer facing me. 2 big honking TV monitors on cart facing the class. And it was the first attempt to create a situation in which what we now take for granted is projecting stuff with these fancy projectors we have, where the students could actually see the changes in the writing on the computer monitors. And I remember doing exercises with students, like in creative writing, sometimes people just get too carried away with adjectives. So I put up a piece of text that somebody had written, and I said, okay, let's look at it in different forms. Let's take out all the adjectives. Now let's keep in only the adjectives you absolutely need. In other words, if you're talking about a concrete sidewalk, you don't really need to say it was a hard concrete sidewalk. Concrete part will do it. Right?
Yeah.
If you had a soft concrete sidewalk, that would be news. And that was a wonderful experience, but it was very cumbersome from the equipment. Because actually, what I wanted to do, we didn't have the equipment yet. The equipment hadn't been invented yet. We were jerry-rigging. So finally, we start getting, computers that can be networked. And there was a guy named John Pattison, I think was his name, over at the Prescott campus. And he wrote a grant to bring in a writing classroom with computer stations for all the students and one for the teacher. And praise his name, John called me and he said, are you interested over there at the Verde campus in something like this and working on this? And I said, I've been waiting for this for now, I think that was, I don't remember when that was, around 1990, somewhere in the 90s. And I said, I've been waiting for this for at least 10 years, around 8 to 10 years. So I worked with him. We got the grant. We got the Verde campus included in the grant. But for most people, they were looking at me like, you need computers in an English class? This isn't science, this isn't math. I said, we need this. So I coordinated that project on this campus, which involved, looking for furniture through catalogs, working with purchasing, finding a space. I remember Eula Dean, I think it was almost her first year here as dean. And I remember walking around with Eula and the head of maintenance, and we would look at classrooms. We had to consider wiring, size. And so we finally ended up picking this one room, G115, over in what was then the science building. And I had to actually design the furniture layout. So it was really
I've had a class or two in there.
Yeah. With those those triangular desks around the walls. So because we absolutely had to get 20 students in, because that a comp class, that was the cap for the comp class was 20 students. So we actually ended up with space for 21, and we had to have a place for the teacher. And at that time, I think we didn't. I'm trying to remember. I'm not sure whether we had a projector from the get-go, but that came in pretty quickly. But the other issue is, because of class limitations that we talked about, this room had to be used. So I knew we also had a lot of adjuncts. We might be hired new, and they might not be ready to convert their teaching over to using the computers. So I said, we also have to have this classroom set up so that it can function as a traditional classroom, with the instructor, working with the students with, not a blackboard, but a whiteboard. So, this was a major design project. Yeah. But I think for me the most important thing was that I had a commitment to this and I pushed it through. I remember talking to one of the IT guys in Prescott, and the way we had scheduled this was they were going to install the Prescott one in the fall, and then we were going to install Verde in the spring using the January break. So near the end of the semester, I get this call from somebody over in Prescott, and oh, well, we're not sure we're going to do. I said, what do you mean we're not sure we're going to do this? I said, it's all planned. We're on schedule. It's going in January. And in a sense, I had to kind of nudge the head of maintenance over here to say, this project has to be done. We have to be ready to teach classes in there for the spring semester. And it got done. And a little, again, boasting on my part, I know it would not have gotten done except the commitment I had to it, and that not only did the work, but pushed it through and knew. And then, of course, it just took off. And now, of course, that's developed to the point where you walk into a new classroom, and these new classrooms here, students have computers, monitors.
All have computers.
We have a thing that allows us to do DVDs, videos, etc. But that was one of the things I saw way before we even had the technology to do it, because I knew it from my own writing. I knew what it had done to my own writing, and so that was one of my one of my big gold stars.
That was awful before computers. I've never had to do it.
This was, you want to talk about my years as a student, but all the papers that I wrote, and you'd finally look, and then you'd realize you had left out 4 lines in the middle of a page, in the middle of the paper. Or you're trying to, instructor insisted on footnotes, and you're trying to, okay, if I type far enough to need the footnote, I won't have any space for the footnote.
Oh, you guys use typewriters.
Oh, we used.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I've used the typewriter before when I was little. It's
pretty sad, right?
Yeah, they're pretty.
I think if we'd had computers when I was a student, I'd probably have had 3 or 4 degrees.
Yeah, they're pretty tedious.
Well, I know we don't have much time, so I guess let's say a word about the liberal studies program, because that was another really important part of my career here. That program was developed, to say, around 1990. Paul Ewing was hired as the liberal studies instructor. He first taught his classes over the system, team taught with colleagues in Prescott. But again, our dean then, again, it was Mary Ann. She wanted us to be able to teach it here on this campus. So she approached me about being part of the liberal studies teaching team here. And I had always had a strong interest across the humanities. I mean, I had minors in philosophy, in German, in history. I loved history. I mean, history was always a competing with my love of literature. So I jumped at this opportunity. And well, for 1 year, I think Dieter did it with us for 1 year, but then he decided he wanted to just go back to his normal bank of classes. So Paul and I became the liberal studies team here. And we team taught the entire Western Civ sequence, Civ 1 through 3. When they brought Tech and Human Values in, we taught Tech and Human Values. We taught the connections classes, and I taught connections classes with other people besides Paul. I developed the Shakespeare on Film.
Oh, did you?
And when we took the honors students to England for my first trip to England, we developed this course called The City in Context, and then I came back and brought that class sort of back into our course bank here. The liberal studies program has been one of the most exciting, rewarding things that I've done in my teaching. The team teaching was incredibly enhancing professionally, you know, to bounce back ideas. And Paul and I always really did it as a team. I mean, sure, you know, he'd focus more on one, you know, he'd do a lecture, maybe I'd do a lecture, but we always threw the ball back and forth in class. And I think you know, you see how we do that. And, you know, tip of the hat to Paul Ewing, one of the most wonderful colleagues you could ever work with. Totally open to what you wanted to do, never let ego get in the way. I mean, Paul is just great to work with. And all those years of teaching in the liberal studies program was incredibly rewarding. And the feedback we got from students was just super. I mean, students would come back to us even after they'd been gone and say, you know, I felt like it was really hard when I did it, but now I appreciate it. I remember one student coming up to me once and saying, you know, looking back now that when I took your Western Civ classes with you and Paul, people talk about things and I know what they're talking about.
Oh,
and that was just like, I went,
oh!
So, yeah, that was.
I took that with Paul alone. It was right after you had retired. I took it 2 semesters ago.
And they had, of course, by then unfortunately discontinued the team teaching.
Yeah.
So, one of the other great things that I was able to do with Yavapai College's help is, and I mentioned it briefly before, after the trip with the honor students, taking the honor students to England, I had found out about summer school programs at the University of Cambridge. And I started attending those in the summer, and I would alternate history programs and Shakespeare programs, and most of them ran in July. I did do one right after I retired. I did one in August. But with a little help from the Professional Growth Committee, I paid most of my expenses. But a little help, probably about 20% coverage from the Professional Growth Committee, I was able to go to these wonderful programs.
Wow.
They're an international student body. And again, somewhat like my own teaching experience here, you had everyone from undergraduates taking the courses there for credit, graduate and undergraduate students who were young people, all the way through retired age people, some taking it just for interest, but lots of either teachers or retired teachers. And so I was in classes with students from all over the world, you know, from parts of Europe, from Australia, from Mexico, from Latin America, from Asia. And you're studying at the University of Cambridge. You're living in a Cambridge college, and you're studying Shakespeare, let's say, right there, you know, kind of
that's
or
really
history,
cool.
right there. And so to be able to do those, and I did those as part of my professional growth and development, and it really did. I mean, that, as I had a chance more and more to teach the Shakespeare class here, I brought so much from the Cambridge programs into my teaching of Shakespeare, and also from the history end into my teaching of Western Civ. So those were wonderful opportunities. In fact, I went back to Cambridge, not this summer, but the previous summer, and I intend to go back and continue to do Cambridge programs occasionally.
Wow.
Got to watch that. Exchange rate's a little fearsome right now,
Yeah,
the dollar and
it's
the pound,
expensive,
but I'm going to save for it because those things are so wonderful.
Really?
And, you know, I hope to still do a little teaching occasionally. I'm going to teach the Shakespeare on Film in January.
Mm-hmm.
Someday I'd love to teach the Shakespeare class again here. You know, I don't know, possibly a creative writing class if they need somebody.
Yeah.
So it's been a wonderful run here. I have no complaints.